In this video we travel to Scotland to try and find a bird that's not been seen on the UK mainland for 10 years. Oh, and there's more. We look for a lifer that we've missed in the past, and we also try and find a bird that Kayleigh's wanted to see since she was 8. Hey folks, we're just about to take a trip all the way up to Scotland to see a very special American visitor, a yellow-rumped warbler, and in this case a subspecies called the Myrtle Warbler. Unfortunately, we're going to have to stay in a Travelodge again because the van still isn't fixed, although some work's been done on it.
We've done the turbo.
Yep.
We've done the ignition switch.
Yeah.
Battery. The injector seals.
Yeah.
And it's still got an oil leak.
It's got an oil leak and a coolant leak, so that's been done in a couple of weeks, so fingers crossed we'll have it on the road in the very, very near future. But until then, let's head up to Scotland and see what we can find. It was a reasonably eventful drive up to Scotland, with the weather going from worse to even worse, starting off with just heavy rain and then moving on to snow blizzards as we drove past Penrith and Carlisle. Eventually, as we came across the border into Scotland, finally, the weather kind of improved, or at least the snow blizzards turned into miserable rain. Eventually, we arrived and settled down for the night. We got up really early and left our Kilmarnock Travelodge, heading 20 minutes up the road to the village of Kilwinning, and onto a housing estate where in one of the back gardens they've had a very special visitor. The instructions on our birding app told us to walk through a brown door which led into a little corridor in between some flats and then out into a shared garden. Feeling very lucky that the resident had let all the birders in, we found a space to stand amongst all the other birders, and one of them told us this rare American visitor had just left the feeders and flown off. Feeling unusually confident, we waited as the sun came up, watching some of the early birds coming to the food, but then the quiet chatting turned into sounds of excitement as the Myrtle Warbler came into sight, actively flitting about in the trees behind the garden fence. Every time it flew, it flashed patches of yellow on its flanks and on its rump, slightly bigger than our British warblers, but equally as mobile. These birds breed in Canada and the northeasternmost United States, and winter in the southeastern United States and Central America. So this bird is pretty lost. Sometimes as it flew it called. This call was a bit like a robin's tick-tick. Although this species has visited the UK about 30 times, it generally ends up on some of the islands around the country, and only 4 of these visits have been to the mainland UK, the last one being in County Durham 10 years ago. And as far as I can tell, feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but this looks like the first one to arrive in mainland Scotland. Initially it was quite mobile around the trees and bushes behind the garden fences, sometimes at the back of the trees and sometimes really nice and visible at the front of the trees. And on a few lucky occasions it came down into the garden on the bird feeders. The garden we were stood in wasn't very big, so the bird came really quite close, and it didn't seem that bothered by the dozens of really excited birders. It quite often got spooked off the feeders by some of the local birds, pigeons and starlings, but it was quite territorial, often chasing off other birds like robins and blue tits. Some of the birders here came from all over the country. We were chatting to a couple who'd driven up overnight from Somerset to see this incredible bird. There was also someone from Oswestry, which isn't too far away from where we are. Not only that, the gentleman who originally found the bird was present too. Ultimately, this was an amazing bird to see, and we felt very, very lucky to see such a beautiful American bird in the UK. Wowzers. We just got an absolute mega. And great views. We were in someone's back garden, it was really bizarre.
You literally went through a
Main door?
Like a house. kind of thing.
Really?
Mental, but
Good
it
thing.
was showing amazing. Just nuts.
It was on the fat balls.
It was feeding on the bird feeders at the end of the garden.
Very active.
Fighting with blue tits, and wow, just wow. I don't know where we're going next. We're going to explore a bit of Scotland now. We'll come for that, and we've got it. So let's see what we find next. Stick with us. Our Scottish exploration continued at Troon Harbour, just 20 minutes away from the Myrtle Warbler, where apparently there are black guillemots present, which would be a great bird for our year list.
Where are we?
Hey folks, we're at Troon Harbour. We've come to see if we can find eider and black guillemot, both of which are in front of me. Peering out into the small harbour, there was an enormous group of common eider. This group consisted of both males and females, with some of the males already displaying. That's an encouraging sign that spring is on the way. These quite large sea ducks have an exquisitely clean plumage of white, black and green, which contrasts against the brown, reasonably dull plumage of the females. These were stunning birds to watch though. There were a number of other birds around the harbour, quite a few gulls, the most abundant being herring gulls like this young one, and also other birds fishing like this cormorant. But we were after the black guillemot, and luckily, very soon, one showed up in the harbour. This species, unlike the common guillemot, is reasonably restricted mostly to the western side of the UK, with only a few colonies in eastern Scotland. It's also not quite as gregarious as the common guillemot, usually being in small groups or pairs. It's a beautifully sleek black and white bird with red feet and red in its mouth. There appeared to be 6 or 7 birds present here, swimming in the harbour, and some even coming up on the harbour wall, really close to us, giving us exceptional views. The only other place in the UK I've ever seen these birds is also in Scotland, in Oban. So, another really nice addition to our year list. As we were leaving, we spotted our friend the herring gull, trying to unhitch a boat from the harbour. I think that was our cue to leave, so we headed round the corner onto some rocks and a beach. Upon the first scan of the scene in front of us, we saw on a rocky outcrop some cormorants and a shag, which is on the right of the 3 birds, the slightly sleeker looking bird. We walked along the beach, exploring all the scenery around us. We saw a few other birds like this oyster catcher, and on the top of a lamppost there were 2 rock pipits making a hell of a noise.
Is that a bit heavy?
Very heavy.
We then headed in the car a few minutes round the corner to a larger bit of beach. Hey folks, it's very very cold outside. It's freezing. Just been on the beach near Troon Harbour. We went to Troon Harbour, which was just stunning. Black guillemots, eiders, really nice footage. The black guillemots were up on the harbour wall. Stunning, really nice. What a day so far. So now we're going to head to Strathclyde Loch, I think it's called. Our next destination was Strathclyde Loch. I'd heard some rumours that they'd had some rare gulls in the past here. We decided it was worth a look even if we didn't see these birds, as it was kind of on our way south. We stopped on one of the car parks on one side of the lake first. This was full of swans and geese, but unfortunately not much else, so we drove round to the other side where there seemed to be more gulls. When we arrived, Kayleigh set up the scope and we started scanning through some of the birds present. Some of the gulls on the water included lesser black-backed gull, there were a few of these, black-headed gull, which were by far the most abundant, and also common gull. These aren't as common as the name suggests, but there were quite a few of them here. We scanned thoroughly, but unfortunately no rare gulls. Hey folks, we're in the sun by the looks of it on the video. I can't see a damn thing, I'm all steamed up. We've not seen any rare gulls, but it's a really excellent little loch. Loads of other birds, friendly geese, only wanting bread, but friendly swans as well. wanting the same. But we're just about to go 2.5 hours south to try and find a Richard's pipit. The Richard's pipit we were looking for had been seen in Ulverston in Cumbria. This was a couple of hours driving through the South Scottish countryside, which was breathtaking. But before we went to the Richard's pipit, there was one small but important stop to make. Hey folks, we're not at the Richard's pipit, we're at a different destination. We stopped off not far from Candle at a castle, I can't remember the name of it. I'll put it up on the screen in a moment. There have been sightings of hawfinch here. And this bird is quite important to Kayleigh. I'll let her explain that shortly, but we're going to try and find them. We can hear, well, we have heard one, but can't find any yet. The grounds of this castle were very pretty, and we set about looking for the hawfinch that had recently been seen, apparently, in the car park. There were some birds that were reasonably obvious, like this song thrush that was feeding on the grass. And in the trees around, there was a few finches like this chaffinch. Eventually we heard something that sounded like a hawfinch, and after some scanning in the trees, we spotted this female hawfinch sat at the top of a tree. Unfortunately, this footage isn't the best because it's a bit of a silhouette, but that isn't the point. This was a really important bird for Kayleigh, and one we'd looked for quite a few times and not found. Kayleigh will explain the importance of this bird a little later in the video. Hey folks, we're wet, really wet. We went to try and see the hawfinch. We did see a couple, which was great. I think they were both females, a bit of a distance, like silhouettes in trees, but just awesome to see, and obviously very special for Kayleigh. So she's super happy. We're going to head to where the Richard's pipit, the aforementioned Richard's pipit, although goodness knows if we're going to see it because the weather's really turned bad. We'll head that way anyway. And
we got to see the hawfinch.
We saw the hawfinch. We've had an excellent day actually
Brilliant
so far. I'll head for the Richard's pipit and see how bad the weather is when we get there, and probably get more wet. Yeah. But hey, that'll be our last switch of the day, and more tomorrow. We may even come back here tomorrow to try and get some better footage for you. Anyway, see you in a bit. We finally arrived in Ulverston. In the rain, we parked up and headed on a bank towards where the Richard's pipit had been seen. We'd read on a birding app that it had been very elusive that day, which doesn't fill us with too much confidence. We scanned some of the fields and vegetation around. There was plenty of swans that were feeding in the field, like this group of reasonably young swans. There were a few little egrets left, flying off one by one to roost, and also some ducks in a flooded field. As the weather was getting worse and it was getting dark, we'd call it a day, and we drove all the way home, if only to avoid the cost of a travel lodge again. The following morning we woke up to much improved weather and headed back to the hawfinch spot. Hey folks, we're back at the hawfinch spot. It's the morning and hopefully the weather's a little bit better too. Let's see if we can find them, get better views of Kayleigh's special bird. When we arrived, we parked in the aptly named hawfinch parking and headed over towards where we'd seen the hawfinch the previous day, seeing, feeding on the floor again, our friend the song thrush. We got to the visitor centre where there was a veranda outside that overlooked the car park. There were a few other birders there already, some of them looking up into the trees. Kayleigh set her scope up to scan, and like the other birders present, we scanned both the car park floor, as hawfinch like to feed on the floor, and the tops of trees. There were groups of other birds that were feeding on the floor already. No hawfinches at this point, but there were chaffinches and blue tits feeding amongst the grass at the bottom of bushes and trees. Reasonably soon, one of the other birders pointed out a hawfinch that was sat in a reasonably low tree halfway across the car park. It was sat in the sun, preening, and although not perfect views, you got to at least see some of the lovely plumage. Soon this individual was joined by other birds in the same tree and some of the bushes at the back. And after a short time, some of them came down and started feeding on the ground. At this point, I'm going to shut up for a minute and let Kayleigh explain why this bird is so special to her.
These birds were my granddad's favourite birds. When I was a child, he used to take me to every single churchyard to go and find these birds. He was an oracle to me. After he died, the birds seemed to disappear with him. So since I came back to birding, I really, really desperately wanted to see these birds again. And finally, I got to see them.
Although we'd love to watch this rare spectacle for a while longer, we had other birds to find. Hello everybody! We definitely got very good views of Hawfinch that time. We weren't the only people who thought, oh, getting here early would be good. There was loads of people. But yeah, great views of Hawfinch.
2 males, 2 females?
Yeah, maybe more. So we're on now to the Richard's pipit.
Try again.
This bird was becoming a bugbear of mine. Almost a nemesis bird. Hey folks, we're back at the Richard's pipit spot we came last night. We didn't see it last night. We think we came a bit late, so it might have been going to roost. That's Kayleigh. More civilised now, yeah, she says. Anyway, we're going to see if we can find it. We've just bumped into a guy who's been here for an hour and not seen it, so that doesn't bode too well. But we're going to walk up the bank and see what we can find. So stick with us. This is going to be a lifer if we find it. We wandered along the bank, scanning both sides, really hoping for the best. I heard a noise. It wasn't a Richard's pipit. It was a great spotted woodpecker, a lovely male, sat on the top of a tree in the sun. As we walked further along, we scanned in some of the bushes and vegetation, picking out yet another song thrush, and a little further on, in a tree above our heads, there was a reed bunting. The information we'd been given is that the Richard's pipit had been seen sporadically over quite a large area of land. Kayleigh set up the scope and scanned all the vegetation and grass in front of us. As we were scanning, more birders showed up. None of them had yet seen the pipit either. As we headed a little back down the path, we saw a white ghostly shape flying. This was a barn owl, and another owl to add to our year list. We've done pretty well so far this year for owls, and this was a lovely addition. It flew along the edge of some farm buildings and landed on a post, slightly obscured by some vegetation. It sat on the post for a short while, surveying the scene around itself, eventually taking off and continuing hunting. This bird wasn't the only bird that was hunting. One of the other birders pointed a shape out in the sky, which was a peregrine falcon. It looked like a male. We looked and looked for quite some time, and just as we were talking about giving up, one of the other birders, who was a little bit further down the path, called us over. He'd seen the Richard's pipit, which coincidentally, his name was Richard. This eagle-eyed chap has somehow picked the bird out in the grass. It had been spooked, flew up to a telegraph wire, and then come back down. Although at a reasonable distance and mostly obscured by grass, we were able to see it and able to tell that it was very different from our common meadow pipit. It was bigger and paler. This species breeds in southern Siberia and north central Asia, and they winter in southeast Asia. They are long distance migrants, and quite a few do turn up every year in Western Europe. We watched it wander around in the grass, sometimes going behind clumps and high grass, and sometimes coming out into the open a little bit more for us to get slightly better views. It never came really close, but at one occasion it stood on the top of a mound, so we actually got a view of the whole of the bird. This species has evaded me in the past, so we were over the moon to finally get this bird on our year list. And not only on our year list, on our life list. It's a lifer. Thanking our lucky stars who had not left earlier, we headed back to the car, seeing this lovely male kestrel on a telegraph pole on the way back. Now though, we had to get back on the road.
Where are we going?
Hey folks, we've just seen that Richard's pipit, which is amazing. We were giving up hope because we were there for a while, and then a very eagle-eyed bird called Richard picked it out somehow, And yeah, we got that, so that's a lifer for both of us. Whoa! We're now heading to Leighton Moss to try and get lesser scorp for this year's year list. So stick with us.
Hello.
Well, hello, the weather's got really nice now. We're heading to the hide that we should be at to see the lesser scorp. It's seen recently, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed on this one. Stick with us, let's see if we can find it. I just heard a bitten. Can you hear it?
Yeah.
Kaboom. Oh, I can hear bittens. As we were running a little bit low on time, we headed directly to the hide where the lesser scorp had been seen, getting very brief views of this marsh tit on the way, which is another bird for our year list. Looking out from the hide, there wasn't that many birds present. There was cormorants and these mute swan that were in front of us. Most of the ducks present were to the far right of the hide, and lots were obscured by reeds. I managed to pick out this ring-necked duck, which is an American visitor, but one we'd seen already this year. One of the other birders in the hide advised us there was a bridge a little further up the path where we might get better views, so we headed there, and very soon we picked out the lesser scorp. There was a pair of them with some tufted ducks. You can see here they're much the same size as the tufted duck and appear smaller and daintier than the greater scorp, with a visible lump on the back of the head. This species are North American ducks, but do come over to this country in small numbers most years. We were super happy to get this sighting. So we're out of time, unfortunately, but it's been a hell of a weekend. It's been quite something, like with megas and lifers and whatnot. Well, there's a calf.
Scotland and back in 24 hours.
Yeah, and then a bit more in Cumbria and Lancashire. But anyway, that's the end of our adventure this time. So thanks for watching. Please like,
Subscribe.
and please press the notification bell. See you on the next adventure. Bye bye.